Good morning, and once again live from the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is the United States Sports Academy Sports Talk. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden, Chair of Sports Management, and I serve as the moderator. And each week we discuss pertinent and timely issues having to do with sport. Today the panel consists of Dr. Steve Butler, who is the Dean of Academic Affairs, and Dr. Tim Foley, who is the Dean of Student Services. Well, last night all of you tuned in and watched our famous college football playoff committee try to determine the top 4 teams. The topic that we originally chose to discuss was who deserves to be number 4. That topic may very well be still appropriate. But we had something interesting happen last night, gentlemen. TCU jumped over Florida State, who is undefeated. So we've got a number of things we want to talk about. I don't think that anyone who's tuned in is not familiar with the college football playoff committee and their composition, although they did have one more person who was not there last night. There were only 11 of them. I forget who wasn't there. Last week, somebody was out because he was ill. Yeah. And then I don't know what happened to this time. But at any rate, they did not stick with the same top 3 as we all felt they would. Thought they would stay with Alabama 1, Oregon 2, and then Florida State 3. But this week they took TCU and jumped over Florida State, who was undefeated, and that presents some interesting dilemmas. As a little bit of a background, we realize now that Baylor and Ohio State are the first 2 out. But that also presumes that all 4 teams are going to win. So this weekend, we're going to see, actually starting Friday night, Oregon plays Arizona, who has beaten them the last 2 times they played. And by the way, Rich Rodriguez, who used to be a GA for us when we were at Salem College, was named Pac-12 Coach of the Year. So that's impressive. And he's also the coach who was fired to bring in Brady Hoke. Michigan, great job. At any rate, in addition to Ohio State and Baylor now, we need to take a serious look, I think, at Arizona, who goes against Oregon, Wisconsin, who goes against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, if it really is a champion league, Kansas State, who plays Baylor, and Missouri's going against Bama, and Georgia Tech against Florida State. So with that as a background, and remember, 4 days from now, Sunday, we get the Final Four. So
I thought that was basketball.
I know. Okay, toss up. Want to go first?
Okay. The original question was who deserves to be number 4?
Yeah.
I can say unequivocally that it is not Florida State. Florida State does not deserve to be number 4. They are the first team in the history of polling in college football that has ever dropped without losing a game that started number 1. That started number 1 and dropped. No other team has ever started number 1 and fell without losing a game.
And you're talking about the human polls.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that Tim and I talked about this a little bit earlier. I believe that without all the off the field stuff with Jameis Winston, Florida State would still be number 1.
A lot of people, and I had that discussion this morning with a couple of people as well. I'm not so sure, although the Jameis seems to be the focal point. I'm not so sure that Jameis, but rather how Florida State and the entire police department in Tallahassee handled it.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. If they had handled this situation with Jameis back when it first happened, his suspensions or whatever's going to happen would have been well over with. And all the other peccadillos that he's committed, stealing crab's legs and screeching obscene immature crap in the lunchroom, they would have been seen as, okay, it's kind of immature, but they would have taken care of that. So I agree with you. Florida State has put itself in a bad situation.
And this argument that they haven't been impressed with their wins just does not hold any water, because you can go down the list. Alabama beat Arkansas 14-13 on a blocked extra point, when at the time Arkansas had lost 30-something SEC games in a row. And why is that barely win over a non-ranked team?
17 games, not 30 games.
Yeah.
In the SEC.
I was exaggerating a little bit to make a point, but it seems to be like there's no consistency. We dropped Florida State because they barely win over unranked teams. Alabama was extremely lucky to beat LSU, who has 4 losses. And you can just go, and I'm not picking on Alabama. You can go through Oregon, TCU the same way. TCU barely beat, who was it? A couple weeks ago, Kansas. Yeah, Kansas.
Kansas.
And Kansas is horrible.
Mm-hmm. They still have football.
Yeah, they barely beat them. I think that, and the other thing that really bothers me about this whole thing is the fact that TCU is still ranked ahead of Baylor. And I heard a great line on Mike and Mike this morning on ESPN Radio. Ron Jaworski came on, and Mike Greenberg says, "Hey, Jaws, we got some good news for you. The committee decided that the fact that you guys lost to Oakland in the Super Bowl 35 years ago doesn't really matter anymore. They think you're a better team, so they're going to give you the Lombardi Trophy."
Right.
A couple things. I just want to go back to for Florida State to still be undefeated with everything going on really amazes me. And then you throw on the shooting the campus or whatever, but I guess you have to give us some credit for Coach Fisher. But when I think of going back to the TCU, the Baylor, I think I don't really consider is there still a stigmatism against Baylor that they score a lot of points but they can't stop anyone?
No, I was just wondering about the same point that you were going to bring up. But remember, they talked about head-to-head competition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's take a look at the head-to-head competition. Baylor has given TCU its only loss, and they have not gotten much respect at all. As a matter of fact, they're now ranked 6th, but they were down there below 10 earlier on, even after they had beaten TCU. And then TCU pulled one out at the very end at West Virginia. So I'm not so sure. I don't know. It just seems to me like the committee has either lost its mind or it's just a bundle of contradictions because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's take a look at some of these things. Let's make the case for Wisconsin if they win the Big Ten championship by beating Ohio State. Make the case that Wisconsin belongs in the top 4.
They don't.
Why is that?
And I think the Big Ten with Wisconsin's strength of schedule not being very good, I think the Big Ten is down. I do not see them as being a top one of the top 4 teams.
They have a really good basketball team.
They do, though. They do.
Yeah, I agree with
that. And I even, excuse me, but I even think maybe a Michigan State would be more worthy of a 4th spot before Wisconsin.
But how could you put it? Let's suppose Wisconsin beats Ohio State in the championship game, and that puts Ohio State out. You're saying, well, we'll take Michigan State over the conference champion? No, you belong on that committee.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah, I personally think that conference champion should be the number 1 priority for the pick in the Final Four. I think head-to-head competition comes in a close second. But I think that you have to, one of the things they keep talking about is good losses and bad losses. I've never heard of a good loss myself, but a loss is a loss. And Michigan State would have the issue of they lost to Oregon and they got crushed by Ohio State. And so if Wisconsin has 2 losses or 3?
Wisconsin has 2 losses.
2 losses. Yeah, I think it's, unless there's a lot of other teams that lose, I think it's going to be very difficult for any 2-loss team to jump a 1-loss team into the Final Four. Now, having said that, in my opinion, and my opinion seems to be a lot more well-grounded than the clowns on this committee, but
I should say so.
I think of the 2-loss teams that are underdogs this week in championship games, I think the one that would have the best case if they win is Arizona.
Yeah, that's the next question I have here. Let's suppose Arizona continues its winning streak over Oregon. And remember, they beat them last year and they beat them again this year.
Being this year in Oregon.
In Oregon. And let's compile that. That takes Oregon off the list. let's suppose Georgia Tech loses to Florida State. Is that going to move TCU up to number 2 behind Alabama? Because I really don't think Missouri will beat Bama. But then what happens? Ohio State is lost. But here's Arizona and Baylor down here in 6 and 7 at the moment. What happens to Arizona? Can they jump up in the top 4?
I think you could see Arizona maybe a 4 spot if they beat Oregon.
I think if Arizona wins, if you look at the big picture of things, they don't replace Baylor or TCU. They replace Oregon in the Final Four if they beat Oregon for the second time. And conversely, I think if Oregon beats Arizona, I think it kind of in some way takes away their only loss.
Well, it's revenge
Yeah.
and justifies it. Okay, let's suppose Georgia Tech beats Florida State, which everybody in Vegas thinks so. Is the ACC going to get anybody in?
No.
I don't think Florida State continually dropping with no losses. I think with one loss, they have no chance.
They may go to 35th.
Yeah. I heard a guy on TV the other day say Florida State's the only team that can win their way out of the playoffs.
All right. Can we see a scenario? Okay, let's ask this one too. I want to ask this one about, is it possible for Kansas State to slip in there?
I would love
Because Kansas State beats Baylor. So that takes Baylor out. Baylor's a 2-loss. And Kansas State ends up with a 10-2 like Baylor with 10-2. Of course, you'd like to see
I would
Kansas
love
State
to see that because I am
because
biased.
he played there.
There's only one problem, that Kansas State was thumped by TCU. So I think that's going to hold some weight with the committee.
43 to 20 or
Something
41
pretty
to 20,
bad.
something like that.
No.
Yeah, and Kansas State also lost to Auburn, and for much of the season that was seen as a good loss and a good win for Auburn. But Auburn ended up with 4 losses, so that loss by Kansas State isn't quite as sparkly as it was 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, I know. So let's suppose I'm looking at the chart right here. Oregon goes down, Florida State goes down, Ohio State goes down, Baylor goes down. Well, all of a sudden we've got Arizona, Michigan State, and Kansas State can slip up in there because that would only leave Alabama and TCU from this week's top 4. And mind you, these things all happening I just don't know what's going to happen.
You know,
Hopefully you're not going to put the scenario out there that if TCU loses.
No.
They're in
No,
trouble.
I didn't. I said
They were 98. You know how they have that thing with the
Yeah.
power rankings? They were 98.2% to beat Iowa State.
Yeah.
If
Well,
that-
Iowa State just needs Chisholm back though. I
Yeah,
realize.
he went like 5 and 13 in his
yeah,
whatever. He went 5 and 20.
So you think Arizona's got a chance to get in? Huh?
I do think so. I do think so. And, if those things that you mentioned earlier, Wisconsin does beat Ohio State, I think you would have to look at Wisconsin, especially being.
Yeah, I think so
conference
too.
champion.
I think Wisconsin is a good team.
I think Arizona, they would have beaten the number 2 team twice, even though it was the same team. It doesn't. I mean, they still beat the number 2 team twice. And Oregon was number 2 when Arizona beat them. They worked their way back up to number 2. If Arizona beats them again, they can look at people and say, "Hey, we beat the number 2 team twice this year."
We take a look at the strength of schedule though. I mean, Wisconsin's down there at 68. Kansas State is at 52. But I mean, you take a look at TCU and Florida State. TCU is 45. Florida State's 43. And I mean, take Ohio State. What's theirs? It's 54. Come on, man. At least Bama's got the 6th highest, and then of course Auburn is still the 2nd highest. So it's really been an interesting season. And I was last night talking with my son, who's just really an avid fan, stays on top of numbers and so forth, and he's got all excited about this. I said, don't you think that this season has been more exciting than last season because we've got the playoff possibilities? What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's just moved. Instead of arguing about who's number 2 and 3, we're now arguing about who's number 4 and 5. I think it's better that we have 4 teams in. I think all of us have said many times on this program that we think we need to go to 8. But if we go to 8, is number 9 going to be ticked off? Yes, but I think they have much less much less of an
Right.
argument.
When you
at
get
that.
down that far, the
Yeah.
pecking order. But my point is this. I think it's been far more exciting because we've paid more attention to more games in more different parts of the country
Sure.
all season long because we're looking at 4 teams possibly getting in as opposed to just the 2. You know, I know you listen to Mike and Mike in the morning, and this morning, one of the things that Mike Greenberg was going off, and he usually does, he's rather irrational, and he was pointing out how terrible this is an injustice, blah, blah, blah. And so Mike Golick says, well, what we need to do, and I hope they do it, Sunday, when they get that Final Four, they're going to go back and they're going to compare using the metrics that they had with the BCS for the past however many years, with the different polls and different the Harris poll and so forth. They're going to compare them and see where they rank using the final top 10 teams. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
We're pretty much running out of time, and we hope you all stay tuned this weekend. Games start on Friday night with Arizona and Oregon playing for the Pac-12 championship, and then on Saturday we've got the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, and a lot of other good games to watch. So we want to thank you for continuing to send in some suggestions for Sports Talk to sportstalk@usssa.edu. And so for the panel from the United States Sports Academy, we're going to sign off and see you next week. Have a great week in sports.